Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will, the responsorial sign we use today, as well as the phrase in the gospel, whoever loses his life will, finds his life will lose it, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Certainly refers to any martyr, but today we focus on Saint Thomas More. He was actually beheaded July 6th in 1500s. His little story, he was a very intellectual man. He was very educated. He studied with church fathers, monks, and he rose up in the ranks of politics in England. He was eventually the chancellor. And during that time, Henry VIII was king. I guess it still makes a lot of sense. Kings have to have heirs, and they have to be in the family lineage. Okay, and we don't get too involved with that here in our democratic society, but I think it's still pretty dominant in those kingdoms that have royalty. Well, the problem with Henry is he had to be matched with a woman. Those were the days. They would send a little portrait of the person that he never met, and that would be the approved wedding, making one kingdom marry another kingdom. So this was Catherine. She was in Spain, and she was to marry Henry, obviously England. And it wasn't love at first sight. It was lust at first sight, but it didn't go anywhere. He had a relationship with her for a few years, and then he got tired of her because she was not bearing an heir. And that's the key here, having an heir, a male heir. Sorry, ladies. Now that's different in England, but then it can only be a male heir, and it had to be proven that it was by his seed in this woman. Very biologically sound, but so impersonal. But again, that's not our issue here. So he marries her, and in order to do that, the church had to adjust. He had to adjust in giving her a permission to marry him due to a lot of circumstances. But eventually the church adjusted and Rome gave him the dispensation. Thomas More was his chancellor. He wasn't too happy about the dispensation, but went along with it because it was from the Pope. When he got tired of Catherine, he wanted to divorce her. Now Thomas is going a little crazy. He said, well, listen, we just got a dispensation for you to marry her from the Pope. She hasn't produced any heirs, and now you want to divorce her? You can't do that. This is marriage. It's a sacrament of the church. So he was on the outs. This is Thomas More. He was on the outs with Henry because Henry wanted what Henry wanted. And Henry was persistent. And he was a little bit of a narcissist, maybe a big narcissist, but I don't want to judge the guy. He's long dead. So he divorces her. Now, anybody who objected to that divorce was outside the realm, in a sense. So he forced people, monks, bishops, lay people, to sign this oath of supremacy that he now took control of the Catholic Church, the Church of England. And he was going to be the supreme leader. Thomas didn't go for that. And everyone through his realm had to sign or else be jailed, be beheaded, or a few other things happened to them. He encouraged his family to use their conscience as to whether they were going to sign this document or not. He made it a public statement that he was not going to sign. Signing it over meant that the Pope was no longer bishop of the church, no longer the head of the supreme church on earth, but Henry was in England. So thus begins the Anglican English Church. There are other controversies going on at the same time. In the north, Luther has just raised his head. He's objecting to the Pope. He's objecting to a lot of theological issues, and he writes his long theses, and he nails them on the doors of Wittenberg Cathedral in Germany. And again, basically, he becomes an outsider. and the followers of him. Now, all of this has so many levels. The religious levels, what we're talking about, but deep, 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 and much deeper, the political issues that we don't talk about necessarily as primary concern. The religious issues in Germany were theological, and they could have been settled, okay, theologically. There were a lot of errors going on. But the leaders, the Saxon leaders in Germany, decided, oh, Luther's taking control. He's got a following. Let's follow him. And let's pull away from Rome, pull away from Rome's control. And that happened. All of the monasteries, the monks either followed him or were taken to jail. So all of the properties of Germany that belonged to the church were now made part of the Lutheran community. So they were taken, they were stolen. In England, at the same time, basically, all of the properties of the church, the monasteries, the cathedrals, all taken over by Henry under this act of supremacy. So now we have the beginning of heresy and the beginning of the breakup of the Christian church. And it's 1500s. Sad, because our history as a family of God is that we're followers of Jesus Christ and there's only one church. But now we have, and then there's more going on in Switzerland with Zwingli and a few other places. Many lay people, and even a monk, Luther was a monk, rising up to say, no, 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 this is the church. This is the authentic church. The Lutheran, the Anglican, the Presbyterian, and so on. And you and I know, historically, Christ founded one church, and even though some leaders, lay leaders, took them off in different directions, there's still only one church, Church of Jesus Christ. Back to Henry. So Henry protests the wedding, and there's not only one wedding, as you know. Henry goes to 8 women that he marries. He never got his male heir. There was one somewhere along the line, but he died at childbirth. So he was not getting his wish. He married young women, he married older women, didn't matter. They didn't produce an heir, a male heir for him. He had a daughter, and she's Catholic, by the way, Mary, Queen of Scots. That's a whole nother story. You can look it up on your history books. But St. Thomas More refused to sign this oath of supremacy, refused to say that this man, Henry, could take over the church and become the head of the church. Jesus is the head of the church, and he appointed Peter, and Peter's successor is the Pope. So he goes to the prison, he goes to the tower, and eventually he goes the way of many of the martyrs in that period. He has his head cut off publicly. And the head is mounted on a long spike outside of the Tower of London. And it stays there a few days until his daughter pays a jailer to steal it. He wraps it up, takes it, and it's preserved in a church. The head is preserved in a church, somewhat preserved in a church in England, St. Dunstan's. Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will. That's the phrase that we use with the psalm. Thomas obviously really was convinced that he was doing God's will. Now, he did it spiritually. He's a very spiritual person, very religious, wrote a bunch of readings and literature on the church, on faith, and so on. He was named as one of the top humanists. That was the philosophy of the day by other people who were very famous, Erasmus being one of them. He took his faith very seriously. He must have been a difficult guy to live with, that was so devoted to God that he wouldn't do anything wrong. It wasn't the Immaculate Conception. He just chose not to do anything wrong, not to sin publicly, not to break the commandments. He himself was so involved with God on a personal level that under his clothing, he wore what we call a hair shirt, a shirt that would make you itchy all day long. To sacrifice, to put himself in connection with Christ. And as we pray for all the people that we've mentioned who are ill, everyone is putting themselves in the presence of God. I know we're putting them in the presence of God. But he willingly took on this sacrifice all of his life. And there were others that other habits and other religious behaviors that he had that put him outside the realm of being normal, an average person. He was very devoted to God and God's authority. When he died, he said, hey, listen, folks, I'm dying as the king's servant, but God's first. So he was the chancellor of England, the king's servant, the right-hand man of the king, but God won him over. Now think of us today. Think of our, I don't say spiritual, our political leaders who profess the same faith we profess, who say the same creed we profess, but their behaviors, their politics do not reflect their faith. Now, okay, this is the United States, so there's separation of church and state and all that good stuff. Separation of church and state was a good idea that Jefferson proposed centuries ago. And what it meant was no state, country, could impose religion on a person. So if you came into America as a pilgrim, or you came in as a Presbyterian or as a Catholic, you were allowed to practice your faith, ideally, according to Jefferson's writings. And of course, that was questionable too as to where that went. But now the controversy in our own society that we have leaders of society, of our political system, who in their behavior and their rhetoric oppose the teachings of the church. And they're not brave enough to say, I'm not going to be a Catholic, so therefore I can say this. I don't believe what the Catholics believe. No, I'm a Roman Catholic. I go to church. I receive communion. And yet, I believe in the diminution of life. Life is not important, as you know it. And people become bottom of the barrel. Even immigrants. Oh, let them in, let them. That sounds nice. But with no preparation, no consideration, no health care, just impose them on society. So society rebels against them. Some of society rebels against them. And they, the immigrants, are pawns of the political system. See, Thomas More would never have condoned that as a political leader, and he was right hand to the king. No. And he went down to his death opposing the rhetoric that forbade Catholic behavior. He gave himself. Why are we wearing red? He gave himself completely to Christ. Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will. Yes, that was Thomas and John Fisher and many, many others. But today we want to focus on Thomas More, who eventually became patron of attorneys. So I pray for my nephew and my niece, who are both attorneys, and all attorneys, and our attorney for Friends of the Word, Bob Shanahan, that Thomas More bless all Catholic attorneys with the idea of justice in all matters. Happy Thomas More Day.